In this video, we're going to be taking a slightly more in-depth look at the roaster's profile settings in the basic or beginner difficulty in Kaffelogic Studio. In this tab, we can do some more advanced editing and tuning of our profile. Starting with the profile settings, here we can access the back-end settings of the profile that we're creating. These are important to ensure that we have our new profile tuned with the changes that we've made on the temperature curve and the fan curve. If you hover over the names of the settings, it will display a full tooltip that has the setting, what that is, how to use it, as well as the default values and recommendations calculated from your current profile. So if you make any changes, those values will adjust accordingly. When you first open up the section, you will see two options: preheat power and roast min desired rate of rise. This is where things might start to seem a bit intimidating, but I assure you we'll get through this together. You can feel at ease knowing that you can shift your temperature profile as much as you would like, and when it comes to the back end, you can take the recommendation value and set that as the value rather than trying to figure out what it should be. So for example, if we have our profile curve here, and let's say I decide to make this a little less aggressive, we can see in our profile settings that our preheat value has changed. It now recommends 870. So what we can do is we can just come in here and we can just enter 870. Let's talk about our roaster a little bit quickly. We don't operate the normal way that a traditional roaster does, where they preheat the roaster and then once it's hot, they add the coffee while the drum is hot. We start our roasts with the coffee in the chamber from room temperature. So the chamber's at room temperature, the coffee's at room temperature. So when we start our roast, we don't have the momentum that's built up from all that stored energy generated in the preheat phase that's inside the drum, that's inside the roaster. So we need to create it. And this is where preheat power comes in. This is a raw injection of energy into the start of the roast to create that momentum that we don't have. A few things to note though: too much preheat power and your roast will pick up too much energy and take off of the profile curve, but too little and your roast will start to undercut the profile. As you start to get a feel for preheat power and playing around, you can start to raise or lower the value above or below the recommendation. Start small with plus or minus 20 watts and then work your way from there. Something to keep in mind when we're talking about preheat: if we have a look at our profile curve and we have a look at the start of the profile curve, we can see this little deviation. This little deviation is not an issue. It's actually crucial for our roast. This deviation is the roaster bypassing the profile curve and including that injection of power or preheat power into getting the momentum for the roast. If we didn't have this, not necessarily to this degree, some coffees will work fine with the preheat that matches the curve, others need a bit extra, but if we end up with too little, we won't see this red temperature line going up and above. We'll see it cut through and we'll see it cut under until we get an error saying that heat too slow. If we just crank the preheat power super high, like mentioned previously, we might end up with a fine start, maybe a bit more of a deviation, but as we get through the roast, after color change, we might see that it starts to lift off above the profile curve, not going exactly where we want it. Let's move over onto roast minimum desired rate of rise. This is a little bit more of a complex setting as it relates to your ROR. It's essentially a bottom cap of your ROR, so it prevents it from falling below the limit that you've entered. This is measured in degrees per minute, so the value that you set means that it will put a minimum limit on the ROR to be that many degrees per minute. So here we've got 1.3. That'll be 1.3 degrees per minute as our new limit. If this is feeling a little bit too complicated, as it was for me when I first started roasting on KL, you can just set it to the recommended value and the roaster will look after everything else. We do have a few tips and tricks. If you see that your temperature deviates from the profile, the very first section of the roast, like mentioned before, it's perfectly normal. It's just the preheat power doing its job. If you see your temperature curve starts to run high around first crack, it could be that you have too much preheat power and you can try lowering the value to correct it. If you've tried that and you see that it's still happening, and taking a closer look at your ROR, you see that it turns into a solid flat line around the time it departs, then lower your roast minimum desired rate of rise setting. And if this still happens, try shallow your fan speed curve for that part of the profile, or stretch out the profile to be a little bit longer. Make sure to double check your values and use the recommended ones if needed. We've uploaded a few tutorials already so that you can get to know your roaster better and level up your home roasting. Have fun exploring on the back end of your profiles. There are even more tutorials on the way, and until then, happy roasting.